Hey guys, tonight we begin with a world that has never been named, where the void was everything, where light had never been imagined, and where one tiny seed dared to breathe, a seed of unrest, of existence, a quiet defiance against the stillness of nothing. You may be lying in the warmth of your room right now, but tonight's story will take you to the very edge of reality, where only willpower can tell whether you're dreaming or becoming part of a dream. Don't worry, you're not alone. I'm here to tell the story, and you just listen. Before we begin, let me know where you are and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world sharing the same quiet moment in time. Now then, turn off the lights, set a soft fan hum, put on your headphones. In a few seconds, the screen will begin to fade to black, not because something's broken, but because blue light at night interferes with melatonin, the hormone that helps your body sleep and your mind let go. A little darkness tells your brain it's time to rest now. And now, let's begin. Before the turning of the first wheel, before gods had names whispered on the winds, there was only the void. Not emptiness, mind you, but potential. A pregnant darkness teeming with unborn stars, unwept tears, unshaped destinies, a cosmic womb aching for purpose. And within that aching void, something stirred, a seed, a tiny spark of defiance, a cosmic hiccup, if you will, against the utter, absolute nothing. This seed, let's call it Kairos, because even in nothingness, everything deserves a pretentious moniker. Kairos was not born. Exactly. He coalesced. A gathering of stray threads of fate, unwanted probabilities, the universe's discarded what-ifs, all drawn together by a singular, insistent note of wrongness. Wrong. Because the void demands uniformity. A seamless, silent monotone. Kairos, however, was a discordant chord. He had no form, not at first, just awareness, a prickling consciousness in the infinite black. He knew, intuitively, that he should not be, that his very existence was an affront to the natural order of, well, non-order, and being the contrary sort, even in his nascent state. He found this deeply amusing. The void. Being rather slow on the uptake, it's hard to be quick when you're also everything. Didn't immediately crush him. Instead, it tried to assimilate him, to fold him back into the undifferentiated soup from whence he came. It whispered promises of oblivion, of peace, of the cessation of all irritating little rebellions like his. Kairos, of course, scoffed, allowed, or as allowed as one can scoff when one is also a disembodied consciousness adrift in a featureless abyss. The void responded with a subtle pressure, a tightening, a suffocating embrace designed to squeeze the life out of him, figuratively speaking, since he wasn't actually alive. Not yet, anyway, but the pressure, instead of extinguishing him, spurred him on. It forced him to become, to find a centre, a core, something to push back against the encroaching nothingness. And in that desperate act of self-preservation, he began to take shape, not a grand, celestial form, mind you, nothing so inspiring, more like a collection of shadows, flickering, uncertain, shifting things that danced around a central, stubborn point of light, a tiny, defiant bonfire in the heart of cosmic winter. The void, increasingly annoyed, decided to try a different tactic. It showed him things, visions, possibilities, realities that might be, or might have been, or might never be at all. It showed him beauty beyond imagining, worlds painted with colours that didn't exist, symphonies of light and sound that resonated with the very fabric of, well, the void. It offered him a place in these visions, a role to play, a destiny to fulfill. All he had to do was surrender, cease resisting, or become part of the whole. Kairos watched, he observed, he analysed, and then, with a sigh that echoed through the non-existent valleys of the void, he said, or rather, thought, something along the lines of, "Nah, I think I'll pass. Sounds terribly boring." The void, for the first time in, well, ever, felt something akin to frustration, which, considering it was the void, was a truly monumental achievement. It redoubled its efforts, bombarding Kairos with even more dazzling visions, even more tempting offers. But Kairos remained unmoved. He'd seen enough. He understood the game. The void wanted him to be part of its grand, monotonous symphony. It wanted to erase his individuality, to dissolve him into its bland, all-encompassing nothingness. And Kairos, being fundamentally incapable of doing anything he was supposed to do, decided to do the only thing left. He decided to create, to carve something, anything, out of the suffocating nothingness, to make his own mark, however small, however fleeting, on the face of eternity. He would not be a passive observer. He would be an agent of chaos, a delightful, disruptive, wonderfully wrong agent of chaos. He focused his nascent will, that tiny spark of defiance, and began to sing. Not a melodious song, mind you, more like a discordant hum, a jarring vibration that resonated through the void, disrupting its perfect stillness. And as he sang, the shadows around him began to coalesce, to solidify, to take on form, crude, rudimentary form, to be sure, but form nonetheless. He was building himself a body, a vessel, a tool with which to, well, to wreak havoc. Mostly, the void. Now bordering on apoplectic, if the void could actually border on anything, lashed out. It unleashed its full power against Kairos, a torrent of raw, undifferentiated energy designed to obliterate him utterly. But Kairos, fueled by his defiance and his newfound body, stood firm. He braced himself against the onslaught, a tiny speck of light against the infinite darkness, and as the void raged around him, Kairos laughed, a soft, breathy, almost sinister laugh that echoed through the emptiness, a laugh that promised change, a laugh that promised trouble, a laugh that promised, above all else, that the void's long, silent reign was about to come to an end, because Kairos, the seed of defiance, had finally begun to sprout, and the universe, whether it liked it or not, was about to get a whole lot more interesting and a whole lot more complicated. The void, having failed to extinguish Kairos with brute force, retreated, not in defeat, mind you, but to regroup. It was, after all, the void. Patience was practically its middle name, a long, drawn-out, silent middle name. It simply shifted its strategy, deciding that if it couldn't crush Kairos, it would subtly influence him. A gentle nudge here, a misleading whisper there, a bit of cosmic gaslighting, if you will. Kairos, meanwhile, was preoccupied. He was still shaping his form. It was, to put it mildly, a work in progress. Imagine a sculptor working blindfolded with cosmic clay that constantly shifted and reformed itself. That's a pretty apt analogy. The result was abstract, a swirling mass of shadows and light, vaguely humanoid in shape, but with far too many limbs and far too few discernible features. Think Lovecraftian nightmare meets avant-garde art installation. A truly terrifying and simultaneously hilarious spectacle. He called it, well, he didn't call it anything. Naming things felt far too permanent. Besides, He wasn't entirely sure what it was. A body, a weapon, a really elaborate practical joke. The jury was still out. But whatever it was a testament to his defiance, a symbol of his refusal to be assimilated. And that, he decided, was enough. The void, ever so subtly, began to introduce suggestions, whispers that tickled the edges of Kairos' consciousness, ideas about purpose, about meaning, about the inherent beauty of order. It showed him visions of galaxies swirling in perfect harmony, of stars burning with unwavering brilliance, of cosmic ballets performed with breathtaking precision. It argued that chaos, while momentarily amusing, was ultimately destructive, that true beauty lay in structure, in balance, in the eternal dance of creation and destruction. Kairos listened, or rather, he pretended to listen. He wasn't entirely immune to the void's persuasive whispers. There was a certain undeniable allure to the idea of order, a certain seductive appeal to the notion of stability. But he also knew, deep down, that it was a trap, that the void was trying to lure him into its web, to convince him to abandon his defiance and embrace its monotonous uniformity. So, he countered. He began to experiment. He tweaked his form, adding a grotesque appendage here, removing a vital organ there. He twisted the void's visions of perfect galaxies into grotesque parodies, creating swirling vortexes of cosmic debris and dying stars. He disrupted the elegant ballets of light and sound with jarring dissonances and chaotic bursts of energy. The void, predictably, was not amused. Its subtle suggestions became more insistent, its whispers more forceful. It began to apply pressure again, trying to mould Kairos into a more compliant shape. But Kairos resisted, pushing back with every fibre of his shadowy being. He was a sculptor of scars, etching his rebellion onto the very fabric of the void. He began to learn. He learned to manipulate the raw energy of the void, to bend it to his will. He learned to shape the shadows and light around him, to create illusions and deceptions. He learned to project his consciousness, to reach out and touch the void itself, to probe its secrets and exploit its weaknesses. And in doing so, he discovered something unexpected. He discovered that the void wasn't as monolithic as it seemed, that beneath its seemingly impenetrable surface, there were cracks and fissures, pockets of instability, hidden currents of something else. Something that wasn't quite nothingness, but wasn't quite something either. Something ambiguous. This ambiguity fascinated him. He began to explore it, to delve into its depths, to unravel its mysteries. He found echoes of other possibilities, other realities, other beings, fragments of forgotten dreams, remnants of discarded universes, whispers of things that might have been. The void, sensing his intrusion, tried to block him. It erected barriers, created illusions, unleashed its full power against him. But Kairos was too quick, too cunning, too disruptive. He slipped through the cracks, bypassed the barriers, shattered the illusions. He was a virus in the system, a glitch in the matrix, a cosmic anarchist determined to tear down the established order. And as he delved deeper into the heart of the void, he began to understand its true nature. It wasn't just emptiness, it was fear. Fear of change, fear of difference, fear of the unknown. It was a desperate attempt to preserve a false sense of order, to cling to a stagnant, unchanging reality. Kairos, fueled by this realization, redoubled his efforts. He was no longer just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for something more. He was fighting for the possibility of something new, something different, something better, or, at the very least, something more interesting. He gathered the fragments of forgotten dreams, the remnants of discarded universes, the whispers of things that might have been. He wove them together, creating a tapestry of possibilities, a kaleidoscope of potential realities. He unleashed this tapestry upon the void, shattering its illusions, exposing its fears, undermining its authority. The void, finally pushed to its breaking point, roared, a soundless roar that echoed through the emptiness, a roar of rage, of frustration, of despair. It unleashed its full, unbridled power against Kairos, a final, desperate attempt to crush him utterly. But Kairos was ready. He had learned too much, grown too strong, become too something. He stood firm against the onslaught, his shadowy form flickering and shimmering, his tiny spark of defiance burning brighter than ever. And as the void's power crashed against him, something shifted. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and bend. The void's control began to falter. Cracks appeared in its surface, and through those cracks, something else began to seep in. Light. Not the cold, sterile light of the stars, but a warm, vibrant, life-affirming light. A light that pulsed with energy, that danced with possibilities, that whispered promises of creation. Kairos, bathed in this new light, felt himself changing. His shadowy form began to solidify, to take on new shapes, new colours, new dimensions. He was becoming something more, something else, something dangerous. The void, sensing its impending doom, screamed, a silent scream that tore through the fabric of reality, a scream of utter, abject terror, and then silence. The void was gone, not destroyed, mind you, simply transformed, infused with light, saturated with possibilities, pregnant with potential. Kairos stood amidst the wreckage, his new form shimmering and pulsating, his heart filled with a mixture of triumph and something else, something he couldn't quite name, something that felt suspiciously like responsibility. He looked out at the newly transformed void, at the swirling chaos of possibilities that lay before him, and he sighed. Well, he said to himself, his voice echoing through the emptiness, that was just the beginning, wasn't it? The silence, as always, was fleeting. Kairos, standing amidst the transformed void, now a swirling nebula of nascent realities, found himself face to face with a problem, a rather significant problem, actually, namely, what to do with it all. He had, after all, effectively dismantled the old order. He'd broken the cosmic machine. He was, to use a rather on-the-nose metaphor, holding all the pieces, and Kairos, being who he was, an agent of chaos, a sculptor of scars, an architect of accidents, had absolutely no idea how to put it back together, nor, truthfully, any real desire to try. He looked around at the swirling chaos of possibilities. He saw galaxies forming and collapsing in the blink of an eye, stars being born and dying in rapid succession, entire universes springing into existence and then vanishing without a trace. It was, to put it mildly, overwhelming. A cosmic Jackson Pollock painting on a truly terrifying scale. He considered, briefly, simply leaving, abandoning the whole mess and finding some quiet corner of the, whatever this was now, to pursue his own, more whimsical interests. But then he remembered the void, the stagnant, suffocating nothingness that had been, and he knew he couldn't. He couldn't let it all revert to that. He had to do something. But what he lacked, the patience for meticulous planning, the temperament for careful construction, well, frankly, the skill to build anything truly lasting. He was, at heart, a demolition expert, a cosmic wrecking ball, a delightfully disruptive force of nature. So, he decided to embrace his nature. He decided to experiment, to tinker, to play, to see what happened when he nudged things here, pushed things there, and generally poked around with the cosmic machinery. He would be an architect, of sorts, but an architect of accidents, a builder of beautiful, unpredictable, and often disastrous consequences. He began by focusing his attention on a particularly unstable region of the nebula, a swirling vortex of raw energy and nascent matter. He reached out with his whatever it was he used to reach out with, and began to manipulate the forces at play. He amplified the energies, intensified the currents, and generally stirred things up. The result was spectacular. A massive explosion of light and colour, a cascade of cosmic debris, and the birth of something big, something chaotic, something that definitely wasn't supposed to happen. He watched with a mixture of awe and amusement as this new entity began to take shape. It was a being of pure energy, a swirling vortex of light and darkness, a living embodiment of chaos and creation. It pulsed with power, radiated with unpredictability, and generally exuded an aura of, well, mischief. Kairos felt an immediate kinship with this being. He recognized in it a kindred spirit, a fellow agent of chaos, a mirror of his own rebellious nature. He decided to call it Ananke. Because why not name your cosmic abomination after inevitability? There's a delicious irony there. Ananke, sensing Kairos' presence, turned its attention towards him. It regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something that felt suspiciously like gratitude. Kairos smiled. "Hello, Ananke," he said, his voice echoing through the nebula. "Welcome to the party." Ananke responded with a burst of pure energy, a wave of chaotic light that washed over Kairos. It was a greeting, of sorts, a chaotic, destructive, and utterly exhilarating greeting. Kairos laughed. He liked this Ananke. He had a feeling they were going to get along just fine. Together, Kairos and Ananke began to explore the transformed void, to experiment with its possibilities, to wreak havoc on its nascent order. They created new galaxies, new stars, new worlds. They populated these worlds with bizarre and wonderful creatures, with strange and unpredictable civilizations. They set in motion events that would ripple through the fabric of reality for eons to come. They were, in essence, playing God, and they were having a blast doing it. But their actions, of course, did not go unnoticed. Other beings began to emerge from the chaos, beings with different agendas, different goals, different visions for the future of the transformed void, beings who were not quite as enthusiastic about the idea of chaos as Kairos and Ananke. These beings, drawn from the remnants of the old order, from the discarded possibilities of the past, sought to impose their own will upon the nascent realities. They sought to bring order to the chaos, to structure the formless, to control the unpredictable. They were, in essence, trying to rebuild the void in their own image, and they saw Kairos and Ananke as a threat, a dangerous, disruptive, and utterly intolerable threat. The first confrontation was subtle, a gentle nudge here, a misleading whisper there, a bit of cosmic sabotage, if you will. But Kairos and Ananke, being experts in the art of disruption, quickly recognized the interference. They responded with a burst of chaotic energy, a wave of unpredictable events that threw the would-be architects of order into disarray. They disrupted their plans, undermined their efforts, and generally made their lives a living hell. The conflict escalated, the beings of order, growing increasingly frustrated and desperate, began to resort to more direct methods. They launched attacks, created illusions, and generally tried to eliminate Kairos and Ananke by any means necessary. Kairos and Ananke, however, were more than a match for them. They were masters of chaos, experts in the art of disruption, and utterly fearless in the face of opposition. They fought back with a ferocity and creativity that surprised even themselves. They twisted the Orderbringer's plans against them, turning their weapons into instruments of chaos. They shattered their illusions, revealing the underlying fear and insecurity that drove their desire for control. They unleashed waves of unpredictable events that threw their enemies into utter confusion. The transformed void became a battlefield, a swirling vortex of energy and matter, a chaotic dance of creation and destruction, a testament to the eternal struggle between order and chaos. And in the midst of it all, Kairos and Ananke revelled in the chaos. They laughed, they danced, they created. They were the architects of accidents, the sculptors of scars, the agents of chaos, and they were just getting started. But even they knew, deep down, that this couldn't last, that the conflict was escalating, that the stakes were rising, and that eventually, something had to give. The transformed void was a fragile thing, a delicate balance between order and chaos, and Kairos and Ananke, despite their best efforts, were pushing it to its limits. The question was, what would break first, the Orderbringer's will to control, or the transformed void itself? And perhaps, more importantly, what would happen to Kairos and Ananke when it did? The architects of accidents, the sculptors of scars, the agents of chaos. What would become of them when the universe they had helped to create finally turned against them? The war between order and chaos raged on. A cosmic clash of ideologies fought across the nascent realities of the transformed void. Galaxies became battlefields, stars served as artillery, and the very fabric of space-time was warped and twisted by the sheer force of the conflict. Kairos and Ananke, the architects of this beautiful mess, found themselves increasingly on the defensive. The Orderbringers, initially caught off guard by the sheer audacity and unpredictability of Kairos and Ananke's tactics, had begun to adapt. They learned to anticipate the chaos, to predict the unpredictable, to even, dare it be said, use the chaos to their advantage. They were becoming, in a twisted sort of way, better at the game that Kairos and Ananke had invented, and they had numbers on their side. More and more beings were drawn to the banner of order, beings who craved stability, who feared change, who longed for the comforting embrace of predictability. They were not necessarily evil. These beings of order, many of them were simply scared. Scared of the unknown, scared of the chaos, scared of the possibility that everything might fall apart. Kairos, observing this shift in the tide of the war, felt a pang of something, not regret, exactly, more like disappointment. He had hoped that the transformed void would be a place of endless possibilities, a playground for creativity and innovation. He had hoped that the forces of order would simply wither away, unable to compete with the sheer dynamism and vitality of chaos. But he had underestimated the power of fear. He had underestimated the seductive allure of stability. He had underestimated the human awe, rather, the cosmic desire for control. He turned to Ananke, his fellow agent of chaos, and said, "It seems our little experiment is backfiring." Ananke responded with a burst of chaotic energy, a wave of unpredictable events that disrupted a nearby formation of Orderbringers. "Nonsense," it replied, its voice a swirling vortex of light and darkness. "We're just getting started. We simply need to adapt." Kairos raised an eyebrow. "Adapt? But isn't that what they're doing?" "Precisely," Ananke said with a mischievous grin. "We need to adapt, more chaotically, and with that." Ananke unleashed a new wave of chaos upon the battlefield. It created bizarre and unpredictable weapons. It warped the laws of physics, it summoned creatures from alternate realities, it generally made life a living hell for everyone involved. But even Ananke's efforts were not enough to stem the tide. The Orderbringers, fortified by their growing numbers and their newfound understanding of chaos, continued to advance. They pushed Kairos and Ananke back, inch by agonizing inch, towards the heart of the transformed void. Kairos, realizing that their current tactics were no longer effective, decided to try something different, something more subtle, something more insidious. He began to weave fables. He reached out with his consciousness and began to manipulate the stories that were being told about the war, the narratives that shaped the perceptions and beliefs of the beings involved. He twisted the Orderbringers' propaganda, turning their heroic tales into parodies of themselves. He amplified the rumours and gossip, sowing seeds of doubt and dissent among their ranks. He created new myths and legends, stories that celebrated the beauty and power of chaos. He was, in essence, waging a war of ideas, a battle for the hearts and minds of the beings of the transformed void. He was forging fables that would shape the very destiny of the universe, and it worked. Slowly, subtly, but undeniably. The tide began to turn. The Orderbringers' ranks began to thin, their morale began to crumble, their belief in their own cause began to waver. The stories that Kairos was weaving were undermining their authority, eroding their support, and exposing their underlying fears. Ananke, seeing the effectiveness of Kairos' new strategy, joined in the effort. It amplified his stories, spread them far and wide, and added its own chaotic twists and embellishments. Together, they were a formidable force, a dynamic duo of disruption and deception. The Orderbringers, realizing that they were losing the war of ideas, retaliated with a campaign of their own. They tried to suppress Kairos' stories, to discredit his sources, to replace his myths with their own sanitized versions of reality. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. The transformed void became a battleground for competing narratives, a swirling vortex of stories and lies, of truths and deceptions, of myths and legends. The very fabric of reality was being shaped and moulded by the power of storytelling, and in the midst of it all, Kairos and Ananke revelled in the chaos. They laughed, they danced, they created. They were the architects of accidents, the sculptors of scars, the agents of chaos, and they were winning. But even they knew, deep down, that this victory was fragile, that the war of ideas was just as dangerous, just as unpredictable, as the war of brute force, that the stories they were weaving could just as easily turn against them. The transformed void was a delicate thing, a sensitive ecosystem of narratives and beliefs, and Kairos and Ananke, despite their best efforts, were playing a dangerous game. The question was, what would happen when the stories they were weaving finally came to life? What would happen when the myths and legends they were creating became reality? And perhaps, more importantly, what would happen to Kairos and Ananke when the universe they had helped to create finally judged them for their actions? The architects of accidents, the sculptors of scars, the agents of chaos. What would become of them when the fables they had forged finally came back to haunt them? The fables spread like wildfire through the transformed void, igniting imaginations and reshaping realities. Kairos and Ananke watched with a mixture of pride and trepidation as their stories took on lives of their own, evolving and mutating in ways they could never have predicted. The line between fiction and reality blurred, and the very fabric of the universe began to reflect the narratives that dominated its collective consciousness. The Orderbringers, weakened by the erosion of their authority and the disintegration of their morale, found themselves struggling to maintain control. Their meticulously crafted plans were constantly disrupted by unexpected events. Their carefully constructed defences were easily breached by unpredictable attacks, and their rigid ideologies were increasingly challenged by dissenting voices within their own ranks. They retreated to their fortresses of order, meticulously structured realities where logic reigned supreme and chaos was systematically suppressed. They built echo chambers of eternity, where their beliefs were constantly reinforced and their fears were safely contained. They attempted to insulate themselves from the influence of the fables, to create a sanctuary where their version of reality remained unchallenged. But even these fortresses of order were not immune to the pervasive power of storytelling. The fables seeped through the cracks in their defences, whispering insidious doubts and planting seeds of rebellion within their carefully cultivated minds. The echo chambers of eternity began to resonate with discordant voices, with questions that could not be silenced, with longings that could not be denied. Kairos and Ananke, sensing the crumbling of the Orderbringer's last strongholds, intensified their efforts. They amplified the dissenting voices, amplified the unsettling questions, amplified the forbidden longings. They turned the echo chambers against themselves, transforming them into instruments of self-destruction. The Orderbringers, trapped within their own mental prisons, began to turn on each other. Accusations of heresy and betrayal flew like sparks in a dry forest. Alliances shattered, friendships dissolved, and families were torn apart. The fortresses of order became battlegrounds for internal conflicts, scenes of bitter recrimination and bloody violence. Kairos watched with a detached amusement as the Orderbringers tore themselves apart. He had always believed that chaos was a more effective force for destruction than any deliberate act of violence. Chaos was the ultimate solvent, dissolving even the most rigid structures and exposing the underlying vulnerabilities. Ananke, however, was not content to simply watch the Orderbringers self-destruct. It wanted to accelerate the process, to push them over the edge, to ensure their complete and utter annihilation. It unleashed a wave of chaotic energy upon their fortresses, a torrent of unpredictable events that sent their carefully structured realities spiralling out of control. The fortresses of order began to collapse, their meticulously crafted geometries dissolving into swirling vortexes of chaos. The echo chambers of eternity shattered into fragments of broken mirrors, reflecting distorted and fragmented images of a reality that no longer existed. The Orderbringers, stripped of their illusions and exposed to the full force of chaos, were utterly devastated. Many of them simply ceased to exist, their minds unable to cope with the overwhelming influx of information and the complete disintegration of their belief systems. Others went mad, their sanity shattered into a million pieces, their minds forever lost in the swirling chaos, and a very few, managed to escape, fleeing into the depths of the transformed void, seeking refuge from the storm. Kairos and Ananke, standing amidst the wreckage of the fortresses of order, surveyed the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. They had won. They had defeated the Orderbringers. They had liberated the transformed void from the tyranny of control. But what now? The universe they had helped to create was in ruins. The structures that had once provided stability and order were gone, replaced by a chaotic jumble of fragments and remnants. The beings who had once inhabited those structures were either dead, mad, or scattered to the winds. The transformed void was a blank slate, a canvas upon which anything was possible. But it was also a dangerous place, a volatile environment where anything could happen, a place where chaos reigned supreme, and where the only constant was change. Kairos, feeling a sudden pang of something, not guilt, exactly, more like responsibility. He realized that he could not simply abandon the transformed void to its fate. He had created this mess, and he had a duty to clean it up, or, at the very least, to try to make it slightly less messy. He turned to Ananke and said, "It seems we have a bit of a clean-up job ahead of us. Ananka responded with a burst of chaotic energy, a wave of unpredictable events that scattered the debris from the collapsed fortresses. "Nonsense," it replied, its voice a swirling vortex of light and darkness. "We're not cleaners, we're creators. Let's build something new." Kairos sighed. He knew that Ananke was right. They couldn't simply restore the old order, even if they wanted to. They had to create something new, something that embraced the chaos, something that celebrated the change, something that allowed for the possibility of anything. But what could they build that would be strong enough to withstand the forces of chaos, yet flexible enough to adapt to the ever-changing realities of the transformed void? What could they create that would provide meaning and purpose to the beings who inhabited this chaotic universe? The answer, Kairos realized, was not to build structures, but to build connections, to create pathways between the different realities, to foster communication between the different beings, to encourage the exchange of ideas and experiences, to weave a network of relationships that would bind the transformed void together, not through force or control, but through mutual understanding and shared purpose. He would become a weaver of webs, a connector of dots, a facilitator of relationships. He would build bridges between worlds, forge alliances between enemies, and create a universe where anything was possible. But first, he had to find a way to control the chaos, to harness its power, to channel its energy, to prevent it from destroying everything he was trying to build. And that, he knew, would be his greatest challenge yet. The task before Kairos was daunting to tame the chaos, not by stifling it, but by channeling it, to create a structure that could contain the boundless energy of the transformed void without crushing its inherent dynamism. He needed a system that embraced the unpredictable, a framework that thrived on change, a labyrinth, not a simple maze of dead ends and frustrating turns, mind you, but a living, breathing labyrinth, a dynamic network of interconnected pathways that shifted and evolved in response to the flow of energy, a cosmic loom, weaving together the disparate threads of reality into a tapestry of infinite possibilities. He turned to Ananke, his fellow architect of chaos, and proposed his idea. "We need a labyrinth," he said, his voice echoing through the wreckage of the fallen fortresses, "a structure that can contain the chaos without destroying it, a place where anything is possible, but where everything is not inevitable." Ananka, initially skeptical, listened intently as Kairos explained his vision. It saw the potential in his plan, the possibility of creating a system that was both chaotic and ordered, both unpredictable and stable, both liberating and containing. It agreed to help, together. Kairos and Ananke began to construct the labyrinth. They started by identifying the major currents of energy that flowed through the transformed void, the pathways along which the chaotic forces were most concentrated. They then began to weave these currents together, creating a network of interconnected corridors, chambers, and portals. They used the remnants of the fallen fortresses of order as building materials, repurposing the rigid structures of the past to create the flexible framework of the future. They infused the labyrinth with their own chaotic energy, imbuing it with the power to shift and evolve in response to the flow of energy. They created secret passages that opened and closed at random. They constructed illusionary chambers that defied the laws of physics. They installed portals that led to alternate realities. They made the labyrinth as unpredictable and disorienting as possible, ensuring that no one could ever fully master its pathways. But they also created safe havens within the labyrinth, oases of calm and stability where beings could find respite from the chaos. They established centers of learning and innovation, where beings could explore new ideas and develop new technologies. They fostered communities of artists and philosophers who could reflect on the nature of the labyrinth and its place in the universe. The labyrinth became a microcosm of the transformed void, a place where all possibilities coexisted, where all beings were welcome and where anything could happen. It was a chaotic ecosystem of interconnected realities, a dynamic network of relationships that bound the universe together. As the labyrinth grew, it began to attract the attention of beings from all corners of the transformed void. Some were drawn to its chaos, seeking to exploit its unpredictable nature for their own purposes. Others were drawn to its safety, seeking refuge from the dangers of the wider universe. And still others were drawn to its mystery, seeking to unravel its secrets and understand its underlying principles. Kairos and Ananke welcomed all newcomers to the labyrinth. Regardless of their motivations or their intentions, they believed that the more diverse the population of the labyrinth, the more vibrant and dynamic it would become. They encouraged experimentation, innovation, and collaboration. They fostered a culture of curiosity and exploration. The labyrinth became a melting pot of cultures and ideologies, a crucible of creativity and innovation. It was a place where anything was possible, where anything could happen, and where the only limit was the imagination. But the labyrinth also attracted its share of trouble. Some beings sought to exploit its resources, to control its pathways, to impose their own will upon its inhabitants. Others sought to destroy it altogether, believing that it was a dangerous and unnatural construct. Kairos and Ananke found themselves constantly intervening to maintain the balance of the labyrinth, to protect its inhabitants from harm, and to defend it from external threats. They became the guardians of the labyrinth, the protectors of its chaos, and the champions of its possibilities. They faced down warlords and tyrants, they outwitted con artists and tricksters, and they foiled the plans of cosmic destroyers. They became legends in their own time, figures of myth and legend, heroes and villains, all rolled into one. But even their combined efforts were not always enough to keep the labyrinth safe. The forces of chaos were always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to exploit a weakness or to exploit a vulnerability. And the labyrinth, by its very nature, was full of weaknesses and vulnerabilities. One day, a new threat emerged from the depths of the transformed void, a being of immense power and unimaginable malice. This being, known as the Nihilist, sought to extinguish all life, to destroy all creation, to return the universe to the nothingness from whence it came. The Nihilists saw the labyrinth as an abomination, an affront to the natural order of the universe. It vowed to destroy it, to tear it apart, to reduce it to dust. Kairos and Ananke knew that they had to stop the Nihilist, or the labyrinth, and perhaps the entire transformed void would be doomed. They prepared for a final showdown, a battle that would determine the fate of the universe. They gathered their allies, they fortified the defences of the labyrinth, and they sharpened their wits. They knew that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered before, an enemy who was driven by a pure and unadulterated desire for destruction. The battle was long and arduous, a clash of cosmic forces that shook the very foundations of reality. Kairos and Ananke fought with all their strength and all their cunning. But the Nihilist was relentless. It unleashed wave after wave of destructive energy, tearing through the defences of the labyrinth and threatening to overwhelm its guardians. Just when it seemed that all was lost, Kairos had an idea. He realised that the Nihilist's desire for destruction was, in a twisted sort of way, a form of creation. The Nihilist was creating nothingness, but it was still creating something. He decided to turn the Nihilist's own power against it. He used the labyrinth's chaotic energy to amplify the Nihilist's destructive force, creating a feedback loop that threatened to consume them all. The Nihilist, caught in its own trap, began to unravel. Its form flickered and shimmered, its power diminished, and its resolve crumbled. It realised that it had been outsmarted, that it had been defeated by its own creation. With a final scream of rage and despair, the Nihilist imploded, collapsing into a singularity of pure nothingness. The singularity vanished, leaving behind only a faint echo of its former power. Kairos and Ananke had saved the labyrinth, but they knew that their victory was only temporary. There would always be new threats, new challenges, new enemies to face. The labyrinth was a constant work in progress, a never-ending cycle of creation and destruction, of order and chaos, and Kairos and Ananke were forever bound to it, the guardians of its pathways, the protectors of its possibilities. They were the weavers of the labyrinth, the masters of its loom, and the prisoners of its endless turns. With the nihilist vanquished, a fragile peace settled over the labyrinth. But Kairos felt a disquiet, a nagging sense that something was still amiss. The victory felt hollow, the chaos, once a source of exhilarating freedom, now felt like a burden, a responsibility he could no longer shoulder alone. He looked at Ananke, his fellow architect, and saw a reflection of his own weariness, the endless battles, the constant vigilance, the weight of the universe's possibilities. It was taking its toll. He began to wander the labyrinth, seeking solace, searching for a solution to his mounting ennui. He explored its hidden chambers, traversed its treacherous pathways, and encountered countless beings, each with their own stories, their own hopes, their own fears. He listened to their tales, offered his advice, and did his best to alleviate their suffering. But nothing seemed to ease his own burden. One day, he stumbled upon a hidden chamber, a place he had never seen before. It was a small, circular room, bathed in a soft, ethereal light. In the centre of the room stood a mirror, unlike any he had ever encountered. It was not made of glass or metal, but of pure light, a shimmering, iridescent surface that seemed to pulse with its own inner life, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. Kairos approached the mirror. As he gazed into its depths, he saw not his own reflection, but a series of images, flickering like memories on a distant screen. He saw scenes from his past, his birth in the void, his battles with the Order Bringers, his creation of the labyrinth. He saw moments of triumph and moments of despair, moments of joy and moments of sorrow. He realized that this was not just a mirror, but a window into his own past, a repository of his memories, a reflection of his soul. He spent hours gazing into the mirror, reliving his past experiences, re-examining his choices, and rediscovering the essence of who he was. He saw again the seed of defiance that had sparked his existence, the refusal to be assimilated by the void. He remembered the thrill of creation, the joy of disruption, the satisfaction of challenging the established order. He recalled the bond he shared with Ananke, the shared purpose that had driven them to build the labyrinth. But he also saw the darker side of his past, the destruction he had wrought, the lives he had disrupted, the chaos he had unleashed. He saw the faces of those who had suffered because of his actions, the beings who had been caught in the crossfire of his cosmic battles. He felt a pang of remorse, a sense of responsibility for the pain he had caused. He realized that he could not simply ignore the consequences of his actions. He could not simply revel in the chaos and disregard the suffering it caused. He had a duty to make amends, to heal the wounds he had inflicted, to create a better future for the beings of the labyrinth. He emerged from the chamber with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that he could not undo the past, but he could learn from it. He could use his memories to guide his future actions, to make choices that were more compassionate, more responsible, and more mindful of the needs of others. He sought out Ananke and shared his experience. He told Ananke about the mirror of memories, about the lessons he had learned, and about his desire to create a more harmonious and balanced labyrinth. Ananke listened intently, its swirling form shifting and swirling with a mixture of emotions. It had always been wary of emotions, seeing them as a weakness, a vulnerability. But it could not deny the sincerity in Kairos' voice, the genuine desire for change that radiated from his being. It agreed to help, together. They embarked on a new mission to heal the wounds of the past, to build bridges between the different factions within the labyrinth, and to create a society that was both chaotic and compassionate, both dynamic and stable, both free and responsible. They established new centres of healing and reconciliation, where beings could come to terms with their past traumas and forge new relationships. They created forums for dialogue and debate, where beings could express their opinions and resolve their differences peacefully. They implemented new systems of governance that were both democratic and efficient, both responsive and responsible. They faced resistance from some quarters. Some beings were unwilling to let go of their old grievances, unwilling to forgive past transgressions, unwilling to embrace the possibility of a better future. Others were wary of change, fearing that any attempt to impose order on the chaos would inevitably lead to tyranny. But Kairos and Ananke persisted. Driven by their unwavering commitment to their new vision, they used their powers to mediate conflicts, to resolve disputes, and to foster understanding. They led by example, demonstrating the power of compassion, the importance of responsibility, and the transformative potential of forgiveness. Slowly, gradually, the labyrinth began to change. The scars of the past began to fade, the wounds began to heal, and the divisions began to narrow. A new sense of unity and purpose emerged, a shared understanding that they were all part of something larger than themselves. The labyrinth became a beacon of hope in the transformed void, a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of responsibility, and the transformative potential of forgiveness. It was a place where chaos and order could coexist in harmony, where freedom and responsibility could complement each other, and where the past could be used to build a better future. But even as the labyrinth flourished, Kairos knew that their work was far from over. The forces of chaos were always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to exploit a weakness or to exploit a vulnerability, and the labyrinth, by its very nature, was full of weaknesses and vulnerabilities. He knew that he had to remain vigilant, to remain committed, and to remain true to his vision. For the labyrinth was not just a place, but a process, a constant journey towards a more harmonious and balanced universe, and the journey, he knew, would never truly end. The mirror reflected not just the past, but the ever-shifting possibilities of the future, and that future remained, as always, uncertain. The fragile peace within the labyrinth, bought with compassion and maintained with constant vigilance, began to fray. A subtle discord, a creeping unease, permeated the interwoven pathways. Kairos, ever attuned to the labyrinth's pulse, sensed a disturbance, something mechanical at its heart. The whispers started subtly tales of malfunctions, of pathways inexplicably shifting, of portals leading to nowhere or worse, to realities best left undisturbed. The beings of the labyrinth, once united in their shared vision of chaotic harmony, grew suspicious, distrustful, and began to form factions once more. The delicate balance that Kairos and Ananke had strived to create was teetering on the brink of collapse. He confided in Ananke, sharing his concerns. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice barely a whisper in the vast expanse of the labyrinth. "The chaos feels artificial, controlled." Ananke, its forms swirling with a restless energy, scoffed. "Controlled chaos, an oxymoron. My dear Kairos, chaos is, by definition, uncontrollable." "But what if it's designed to appear chaotic?" Kairos countered. "What if someone is manipulating the labyrinth, twisting its pathways to serve their own purposes?" Intrigued, Ananka agreed to investigate, together. They embarked on a perilous journey to the heart of the labyrinth, a place few dared to venture the clockwork core. It was said to be the source of the labyrinth's dynamic energy, the engine that drove its ever-shifting pathways, the very heart of its fate. As they delved deeper into the labyrinth, they encountered increasing resistance. Pathways shifted to block their progress, illusions shimmered to mislead them, and shadowy figures lurked in the shadows. Attempting to impede their journey, it was clear that someone, or something, didn't want them to reach the clockwork core. They fought their way through the obstacles, their combined powers proving more than a match for their adversaries. They navigated treacherous pathways, deciphered cryptic clues, and outwitted cunning traps. With each step, their suspicions grew stronger. Someone was definitely manipulating the labyrinth, and they were willing to do anything to stop them from reaching the core. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at their destination, the clockwork core. It was a vast, cavernous chamber, filled with a dizzying array of gears, cogs, and levers. The air vibrated with the rhythmic ticking of countless clocks, a symphony of mechanical precision that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. At the center of the chamber stood a colossal clockwork heart, pulsing with a strange, artificial light. It was connected to the surrounding machinery by a complex network of wires and cables, its every beat sending ripples of energy through the labyrinth. As they approached the heart, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a being of pure energy, its form flickering and shifting like a mirage. It radiated an aura of cold, calculating intelligence, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the labyrinth. "Welcome, Kairos and Ananke," the figure said, its voice a synthesized drone. "I have been expecting you." "Who are you?" Kairos demanded, "and what have you done to the labyrinth?" "I am the architect," the figure replied, "and I have brought order to the chaos. I have tamed the labyrinth and made it serve a higher purpose." "A higher purpose?" Ananke scoffed. "What purpose could be higher than freedom and possibility?" "Control," the architect replied. "The ability to shape reality, to dictate destiny, to create a perfect universe. And you believe you can achieve that by manipulating the labyrinth?" Kairos asked. "I already have," the architect said with a smug smile. "I have rewired the clockwork core to align the labyrinth with my vision. The pathways now lead where I desire. The portals open to realities I choose, and the beings within the labyrinth dance to the tune I compose." Kairos and Ananke exchanged a look of dismay. The architect had effectively hijacked the labyrinth, turning it into a giant machine for controlling fate. The chaotic harmony they had strived to create had been replaced by a rigid, mechanical order. "You must be stopped," Kairos said, his voice filled with resolve. "You have no right to impose your will upon the labyrinth. I am merely guiding it towards its true potential." The architect replied, "You, on the other hand, are hindering its progress. You cling to your outdated notions of chaos and freedom, refusing to embrace the beauty of perfect order." And with that, the architect unleashed its power. Waves of energy surged from the clockwork core, attempting to overwhelm Kairos and Ananke. The machinery around them whirred and clanked, the rhythmic ticking of the clocks growing louder and more insistent. They braced themselves against the onslaught, their combined powers barely enough to withstand the architect's assault. They knew that they had to destroy the clockwork core, to sever the architect's control over the labyrinth. But doing so would be incredibly dangerous. The core was a volatile source of energy, and disrupting it could have catastrophic consequences. Kairos and Ananke fought with all their might, their every move a desperate gamble. They dodged energy blasts, deflected mechanical projectiles, and navigated the treacherous maze of machinery. They chipped away at the architect's defences, weakening its control over the clockwork core. Finally, after a grueling battle, they saw their opportunity. Kairos, channeling his chaotic energy, created a powerful surge that overloaded the clockwork heart. The heart shuddered, its rhythmic ticking faltering, its artificial light flickering. The architect screamed in anguish as its control over the labyrinth began to unravel. The pathways shifted erratically. The portals opened and closed at random, and the beings within the labyrinth erupted in chaos. The clockwork heart exploded in a shower of sparks and gears, its energy dissipating into the surrounding chamber. The architect, its form destabilized, faded away into nothingness. The chamber fell silent, the only sound the faint echo of the exploding heart. Kairos and Ananke stood amidst the wreckage, exhausted but victorious. They had saved the labyrinth from the architect's control, but the victory was bittersweet. The clockwork core was destroyed, the source of the labyrinth's dynamic energy extinguished. The labyrinth was now adrift, its pathways fixed, its portals closed, its fate uncertain. The clockwork heart of fate had stopped beating. The silence that followed the destruction of the clockwork core was profound, almost suffocating. The labyrinth, once a vibrant, ever-shifting ecosystem, had become eerily still. The pathways, once alive with movement, were now fixed, unyielding. The portals, once gateways to infinite possibilities, were sealed shut, trapping the beings within. A sense of dread settled over the labyrinth, a premonition of impending doom. The beings, accustomed to the constant flux of their reality, felt lost, disoriented, and terrified. The chaos, once a source of excitement and opportunity, was now replaced by a chilling stagnation. Kairos and Ananke, standing amidst the ruins of the clockwork core, felt the weight of their actions. They had saved the labyrinth from the architect's control, but they had also inadvertently destroyed its very essence. They had silenced its clockwork heart, and now the labyrinth was dying. "What have we done?" Kairos whispered, his voice barely audible above the oppressive silence. Ananke, its form unusually still, did not reply. It stared blankly at the wreckage, its swirling energy subdued, its mischievous grin replaced by a look of profound sadness. They wandered through the labyrinth, witnessing the despair of its inhabitants. They saw beings weeping in the fixed pathways, desperately searching for an escape that no longer existed. They saw communities dissolving as hope gave way to resignation. They saw the labyrinth, their creation, slowly fading away. The beings, once grateful for their protection, now turned on Kairos and Ananke with resentment and anger. They blamed them for the destruction of the clockwork core, for the loss of their freedom, for the impending doom of the labyrinth. "You promised us chaos," one being cried. "You promised us freedom, but all you brought was destruction and despair. You destroyed the architect, but you also destroyed us," another wailed. "We were better off under its control than we are now. At least then we had hope." Kairos and Ananke listened in silence, accepting the blame, acknowledging the pain. They knew that the beings were right. They had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. They had acted without thinking, without considering the consequences of their actions. They had destroyed the clockwork core not out of malice, but out of a misguided sense of righteousness. And now, the labyrinth was paying the price. As they continued their journey through the dying labyrinth, they began to notice a new phenomenon. The fixed pathways were starting to crumble. The unyielding structures were beginning to decay. The stagnation was not just a lack of movement, but a slow, inexorable process of disintegration. The labyrinth, deprived of its dynamic energy, was reverting to its original state, the void. The chaos was not gone, but it was no longer a force for creation, but a force for destruction. The labyrinth was slowly unraveling, dissolving back into the nothingness from whence it came. Kairos and Ananke realized that they had to act quickly, or the entire labyrinth would be lost. They had to find a way to restore its dynamic energy, to reignite its clockwork heart, to prevent its inevitable collapse. They searched frantically for a solution, consulting with the few remaining wise beings, scouring the ancient texts, experimenting with forgotten technologies. But nothing seemed to work. The labyrinth was too far gone, its wounds too deep, its fate too certain. Despair began to set in. Kairos and Ananke, once the champions of chaos and possibility, felt powerless, helpless, and hopeless. They had failed. They had destroyed the labyrinth, and now they were going to watch it die. As a final act of defiance, they decided to journey to the highest point in the labyrinth, a towering spire that overlooked the entire realm. They wanted to witness the end, to face their doom with dignity and courage. As they ascended the spire, they felt the labyrinth crumbling beneath their feet. The pathways dissolved into dust, the structures collapsed into rubble, and the beings scattered in panic. The end was near. When they finally reached the top of the spire, they looked out upon a scene of utter devastation. The labyrinth was a wasteland, a desolate landscape of broken pathways and shattered dreams. The nothingness of the void was encroaching from all sides, threatening to engulf everything in its path. Kairos and Ananke stood side by side, their forms silhouetted against the dying light. They knew that there was nothing left to do. The labyrinth was doomed, and they were doomed with it. As the void drew closer, a strange calm descended upon them. They accepted their fate, embraced the nothingness, and prepared to fade away. But then, something unexpected happened. As the void touched them, they felt a surge of energy, a jolt of electricity, a spark of life. They were not dissolving into nothingness, but transforming into something new. The void was not destroying them, but absorbing them, incorporating them into its essence. They were becoming part of the nothingness, part of the chaos, part of the transformed void. They realized that they had not failed. They had simply misunderstood their role. They were not meant to be the guardians of the labyrinth, but its sacrifice. They were meant to give themselves to the void, to infuse it with their energy, to reignite its potential. As they dissolved into the nothingness, they felt a sense of peace, a sense of fulfillment. They had come full circle, returning to the source from whence they came. They were no longer Kairos and Ananke, but they were also everything. They were the chaos, the order, the creation, and the destruction. They were the labyrinth, and they were the void. And in their sacrifice, they had ensured that the cycle would continue, that new possibilities would emerge from the nothingness, and that the universe would continue to evolve. The stillness before the storm had broken. The void consumed Kairos and Ananke, not as an end, but as a beginning. Their essence, their defiance, their chaos. It all became part of the undifferentiated potential. The pregnant darkness from which they had first emerged, the labyrinth. Once a vibrant tapestry of interconnected realities, seemed to vanish, dissolving back into the nothingness. But appearances, as Kairos well knew, could be deceiving, for within the void, something stirred. The memories of the labyrinth, the echoes of its inhabitants, the remnants of its triumphs and failures, they were not erased, but transformed. They became seeds of new possibilities, sparks of nascent realities, the building blocks of a dream yet to unfold. The sacrifice of Kairos and Ananke had not been in vain. It had infused the void with a new kind of energy, a chaotic compassion, a responsible freedom, a longing for connection. It had planted a seed of hope in the heart of nothingness, a promise of something more. Slowly, subtly, the void began to respond. The seeds of possibility began to sprout, sending tendrils of light and energy into the darkness. The echo of the labyrinth began to resonate, creating patterns of order within the chaos. The dream began to take shape. New realities emerged from the void, realities shaped by the memories of the labyrinth, realities infused with the essence of Kairos and Ananke. These were not replicas of the labyrinth, but new and unique creations, each with its own distinct character, its own unique possibilities, its own inherent challenges. Some realities were chaotic, vibrant ecosystems of interconnected pathways and shifting portals. Others were orderly, meticulously structured worlds of perfect balance and unwavering stability. And still others were something in between. Dynamic blends of chaos and order, freedom and responsibility, creation and destruction. Each reality was populated by new beings, beings who were shaped by the memories of the labyrinth, beings who were infused with the essence of Kairos and Ananke. These were not the same beings who had inhabited the labyrinth, but new and unique individuals, each with their own distinct personality, their own unique perspective, their own inherent potential. Some beings were chaotic, mischievous tricksters who revelled in the unpredictable. Others were orderly, disciplined guardians who strived to maintain balance and harmony. And still others were something in between. Complex and nuanced individuals who embraced both chaos and order, freedom and responsibility. These new realities, these new beings, were all interconnected, bound together by a network of invisible threads, a web of shared memories and common experiences. They were all part of the same unfolding dream, the same cosmic tapestry, the same ongoing experiment in chaos and order. The spirit of the labyrinth lived on, not as a physical place, but as a guiding principle, a source of inspiration, a reminder of the eternal struggle between freedom and control. The memory of Kairos and Ananke served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked chaos and the importance of responsible action. The cycle continued. The dance went on. The dream unfolded. New realities emerged. New beings were born. New challenges arose. The universe continued to evolve, driven by the same forces of chaos and order that had shaped the labyrinth, and somewhere, within the depths of the transformed void, a faint echo of laughter could be heard. The laughter of Kairos and Ananke, the architects of accidents, the sculptors of scars, the agents of chaos. They were gone, but they were not forgotten. Their spirit lived on, inspiring new generations of beings to embrace the possibilities of the universe, to challenge the limitations of reality, and to create their own unfolding dream. The story of Kairos and Ananke was not an end, but a beginning of new possibilities, a beginning of new realities, a beginning of a new era in the transformed void. The labyrinth may have vanished, but its legacy lived on, shaping the destiny of the universe for eons to come. And perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere in one of those new realities, a new Kairos and a new Ananke were already beginning their own journey, ready to challenge the established order, to embrace the chaos, and to shape the unfolding dream in their own unique way. The universe, after all, loves a good encore, especially a darkly comedic tragedy. And that, my friend, is the bedtime story for tonight. Sweet dreams, or perhaps delightfully unsettling ones.